Welcome. It is the Northside Baseball Podcast. He is Jason Ross. I'm Mitch Woodmeyer, talking anything and everything Chicago Cubs baseball. However you get your podcast, maybe it's via our website at Northside Baseball, our YouTube channel, Northside Baseball, Apple Podcast, a variety of other ways. We always appreciate you tuning in. Again, if you're watching via video, I say it every week. You can see the topics laid out to your right. If you're listening via audio, it'll be a little bit more of a surprise. That's never a bad thing. Per the usual, we are recording on a Tuesday for a Wednesday publish. So the Cubs have, at the time of this recording, not started the series against the New York Mets, who are battling for their playoff lives, which is kind of sets up for a very interesting series after the weekend the Cubs had in Cincinnati. Jason, always appreciative of your time. I think there's definitely a couple of interesting things to note and talk about. And I thought we'd kind of lead off with Kyle Tucker, given that there was an update earlier on Tuesday, or somewhat of an update. Jed Hoyer noting that Kyle Tucker has returned to Chicago from Tampa, and noted in his own words that the hope is that Tucker progresses to the point that they can get him in the lineup for a few games by the time the regular season ends this weekend, and then you turn the page to the postseason. So I think kind of an optimistic update, maybe, because the panic had set in for somewhere. They're like, oh my god, I saw an article where someone said Kyle Tucker's probably played his last game as a Chicago Cub, and it's like, holy crap, okay, we're going to those extremes already. So I think the Jed Hoyer update is a bit optimistic. I think it just, maybe not optimistic, it provides some clarity that their thinking, or their thought process is, we hope to have him for at least a couple, he said a few regular season games before the postseason starts. So that was kind of the update we got earlier on Tuesday. I will note too, and then I'll hand it over to you, Jason. Kyle Tucker does strike me as the type of guy that, if he were to not play again until the postseason, I'm almost fine with it, just for the type of player that he is. I mean, ideally you would get some reps, but if not, you kind of just trust the player that Kyle Tucker is. But certainly it sounds like the Cubs' plan is to get him at least a couple of games before the postseason.
Yeah, and I think, even if you don't get him a bunch of games, if your two options are like rookie DH, like if they wanted to go with like Ballesteros in the playoffs, or Kyle Tucker, who might not have had a lot of game action, I know which one I trust more. And it's not that Moises Ballesteros is a bad player or hasn't shown some really good things lately. It's that, one of them has a track record of being a really good Major League Baseball player for half a decade, and the other one has 100 Major League plate appearances. And you just can't, I don't think you can go into that series thinking that you're a better team with Kyle Tucker on the bench. It did sound maybe a little optimistic. And if you want your kind of negative view on things, the Cubs kind of do this where they'll be like, well, I don't think he needs an IL stint. And then he needs an IL stint, and we don't know if he's going to see a regular season game. That was literally 2 weeks ago. So, I guess we'll have to kind of see how that progresses. I'm hoping we see him for a couple of games. Even if he gets just 10 at bats in, you get some swings in, he's DHing. That, I think that works fine for me. So I guess I'm not 100% worried about him. Like I said, there's that little bit of a voice in the back of my head that says, you've seen this story too often, where the team says, oh, they don't need an IL trip. Oh, they're perfectly fine. And then they do. The Cubs tend to lead with their optimism when it comes to injuries. It feels like, at the same time, I think, I want to believe them on this. I don't think he'd be back in Chicago if he was still rehabbing. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see him a little bit this week. I think that would be good for him. I think it would be good for him to get some swings in and feel a little bit better. And I think that'll help the team too. I mean, they hadn't lost 4 games in a row all season, and they just got swept to the Reds, and they looked awful. They looked real bad. So hopefully, they get Tucker back, they get a little bit of momentum. They can win a couple of these games. They can kind of like really close out home field advantage and go from there. And I think Kyle Tucker being a part of that would be not only good for his mental ability, but good for the Cubs as they head into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think disaster scenario here when you talk about playoff picture is you just got swept by the Reds, and the Mets are going to be a desperate team. They are quite literally tied with Cincinnati, entering play on Tuesday night for the last spot in the National League, and the Diamondbacks are hot on the heels of both of those teams, just one game out. So you're going to get a desperate Mets team. I think worst case scenario is the Cubs keep sinking to the point where you get leapfrogged by the Padres, and instead of hosting a best of 3 at Wrigley Field, you're heading all the way out to the West Coast to play on the road against the Padres. So hopefully the Cubs can figure it out, pick up a couple of wins. I believe I'm not going to say I believe they are 2.5 clear of San Diego entering play on Tuesday night. So you still feel kind of good about that, again, unless the Cubs just completely collapse. I will note, too, the Hoyer update, if you will, on Tuesday was much more optimistic. I will use that word now compared to what Craig Counsell had just said 2 days prior. On Sunday. Yes. Counsell was asked about Kyle Tucker's rehab and what the plan was, and Counsell's exact quote was, "We've got to figure out when and if he'll even be available." And so when you hear that, it's like, oh no, like how bad is this with Kyle Tucker? And then Jed Hoyer's hope as of Tuesday is to get him into the lineup before the end of the regular season. What kind of sucks too, Jason, is I saw this via Bleacher Nation. His last 47 plate appearances before the injury for Kyle Tucker, he was slashing 400, 489, 800 with 253 WRC plus, which like it's a small sample size of 47 plate appearances, but I mean,
it was really good.
That's pretty damn good. Like it looked like, okay, Kyle Tucker's figuring it out. And Kyle Tucker's Kyle Tucker again. So to have it pop up when he was in the midst of that just kind of pours a little bit of salt into the wound. I guess the last thing on the Tucker front that I have for you, and then of course you can note whatever else you have, Jason, but do you believe when he returns, let's just say if he returns and he's good to go for the playoffs, does he immediately slot back into that number 2 spot in the lineup for you?
Might as well at this point. I mean, he's kind of where he's hit all season. I think he helps break up things at the top of the order, kind of lefty righty type of a situation. And he's such an interesting person because when Kyle Tucker's playing really well, he's a lefty who hits lefties, and we don't see a lot of those. Michael Busch is somebody who is a lefty who doesn't really hit lefties all that well. We've played the game over and over again. It doesn't work. Kyle Tucker has great numbers against lefties. Even on the season, just as we're talking about it, I'm going to pull it up, and I guarantee you his numbers are still good against lefties, even though the team hasn't hit against lefties. He's played well against lefties, and we don't always recognize that. And looking at it, he has a 138 WRC plus against left-handed pitching. He has a 140 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. So putting him in that 2 spot kind of makes that top of your order a little bit split proof, in the sense that, yeah, sure, if you want to bring in a lefty to face Michael Busch, go for it. Then what you have at the top of the order is you have coming behind them is you have Kyle Tucker and then Seiya Suzuki. Seiya Suzuki, I know, hasn't been hitting all that great lately. I have to assume he's going to figure it out. He's a good player. He's hit lefties really well this year. So then you have them coming up behind him. So yeah, I would like to keep him in the 2 spot. I think that's where he kind of belongs in the lineup. I'm not a big lineup construction kind of guy in the big picture, but I think when you get into the playoffs, things kind of, you're a little bit more nuanced at that point. A lot of these projection systems on lineup, they're over a 162 game sample size. On a smaller sample size, I think when you talk about like an individual game, I think kind of maximizing to the best of your ability is important, and putting Tucker in that 2 spot that just kind of lets you have a little bit more confidence no matter what happens in the spot before him at the top of your order. I think that just kind of matters just a little bit more in the playoffs than it does over the course of 162 games.
Northside Baseball Podcast. He is Jason Ross. I am Mitch Woodmeyer, talking anything, everything Chicago Cubs baseball. All right, another injury that seems more imminent in terms of a return. Closer Daniel Palencia. He pitched at Iowa before their season ended, 2/3 of an inning, a couple punchies, couple hits. The velocity was there. That was the one thing I wanted to see with Palencia, and the velocity was there, Jason. He had multiple pitches over 100 miles per hour, 21 total pitches, 15 were strikes, so the command was pretty good as well for Palencia in that outing in Iowa. Still got bumped around a little bit. I guess my main question for you with Palencia, and it's, there's a question mark at the end of it on our rundown, is do you just slot Palencia right back into that closer spot? I'm talking for the postseason too. I mean, this last week of the regular season, we care, but we don't really, we just know where the Cubs are going to be, right? Wild card team, probably the 4 seed. And so when the playoffs roll around, do you immediately put Palencia back in that closer spot? Do you hand those reins to Brad Keller? I mean, I would imagine, regardless of what Palencia's role is, he is going to be pitching high leverage spots in the postseason. I guess the biggest question is, do you want him back there as the guy coming off this injury, shoulder tightness in the ninth inning, slamming the door shut.
If you feel as though the stuff is there and he's looks like he's throwing strikes and he looks like he's healthy and you believe those things, then you have to start to look at your relief options, your pitching options in general on this team. And if we're putting Andrew Kittredge as maybe not the closer, right? And he's been probably our best reliever of the last 2 months, but I don't think the Cubs put him as the closer. I think he's a little bit more like seventh inning guy. You start to look at the guys who have been around all season, and if you're looking at your xFIP, you're looking at your numbers. Brad Keller and Daniel Palencia are easily your two best relievers. Like it's not even close. They've been your best relievers. Daniel Palencia has been your best strikeout pitcher on the season. He's a very good pitcher especially when that slider is working. He strikes out 28.1% of the hitters. He's not walking people. He does not give up hard contact usually. He gave up those home runs the night he hurt his shoulder. But if he's healthy, yeah, he's probably your best reliever. Him, Brad Keller, it's kind of a toss-up between there. With Andrew Kittredge, you've got three guys. I don't think it necessarily matters which one it is, but yeah, I mean, if you believe he's healthy, then he's there. If you don't believe he's healthy, then he shouldn't be on your playoff roster to begin with. So I guess I kind of come down to, I would love to have 2 weeks of proof that everything's perfect and healthy, but that's not going to be an option. That's not in the cards. So you have to kind of start to put your cards down on the table and say, okay, who do I feel the most comfortable with? And I felt very comfortable with Daniel Palencia all season. If I feel comfortable enough to put him on my playoff rotation or my playoff roster, then I believe he's healthy. And if I believe he's healthy, then I don't know why he wouldn't be the guy. On the flip side, if you don't believe he's healthy and you don't really have that trust in him, that's a whole different conversation about as to whether he needs to be on the playoff roster. If you don't trust him to have his stuff there, then is he coming out in the 6th or the 7th inning? Yeah, maybe you keep him on there, but then I start to have some issues. So I guess I lean on if the team believes he's healthy, if the stuff, because the stuff looked fine in Iowa. If you believe in all those things, you think everything's healthy, everything's normal, then he's the guy. And I don't know how you feel about that or where you kind of sit on that one, Mitch. But that's kind of where I'm thinking of it through that. If you trust him to be healthy, then I trust him to be the guy.
Yeah, no, I'm in lockstep with you on that 100%. If he's clear, I think of it like a quarterback in the NFL. Like if a quarterback is injured but he gets cleared to play, I'm assuming as a head coach, like we have our full playbook to use, right? Otherwise, he shouldn't be out there. If he's out there and he's hobbling around, he's at 50%, the arms hurt, whatever, and I have to limit what I call for the offense, then my quarterback probably shouldn't be out there. If your closer, Daniel Palencia, who has electric stuff, and we know it was a little bit rocky there those last few outings before the shoulder tightness popped up. But if he's good to go and he is on your playoff roster, I think just with the stuff that he has that he presents and brings to the table, he should be out there for the 9th inning. That's not a knock on Brad Keller at all. It's just who Palencia has been this year. So I 100%, you put it perfectly. If he's healthy enough to be on your postseason roster, I am assuming he is healthy enough to go out there and slam the door in the 9th inning when you're leading by 1 or 2 runs and need those last 3 outs. So I agree with you. And man, it's fun watching him too, because he plays with like an energy and a passion, or pitches with an energy and a passion that like fits October baseball. You know what I mean? Like when the crowd's humming and you can feel it in the broadcast that you're watching, and he gets one of those electrics. Was it against the Cardinals this year where he was John with Contreras, or who was that against this year?
Yeah. It was Contreras because he hit him, and it wasn't even really like it was. Like it was clearly not on purpose.
Yes,
and it was just back and
forth. He doesn't back down.
He
got
does
that
not.
energy, man. Yeah, I remember that. So I would hope that if Palencia is good enough to be on the roster, the Cubs should have no reservations about him closing in the 9th inning. Actually, let me ask you this. This wasn't on the rundown. It just kind of popped into my head when you were rolling through kind of the Rolodex of some of those names when you were talking Keller and Kittredge and Palencia. I'm going to just 2 names in particular. Do like Colin Ray and Aaron Savali have a role on this postseason roster, or would they merely make it as like a filler piece? As like, hey, our starter only went 3 innings. We need to eat some innings. here's Colin Ray or Aaron Savali. Like, do you see
I
either
think
of those guys pitching in a high leverage spot out of the bullpen? Because I don't.
no.
I don't.
No,
Okay, you don't.
no,
Okay.
they're there if somebody blows up and you need to eat some innings and a loss. There's I'll kind of go back to I remember this. There was a YouTube video and I can't remember who made it. So whoever made this, I'm very sorry that I can't give it to you. I give you the credit right now. But it was this great documentary on former Cubs reliever Will Omen. And I don't know if you remember Will Omen, but he pitched in the like mid to late aughts with the Cubs. He was a lefty, pretty good reliever. But the entire concept was over something called the designated loser. And basically what Will Omen would do is they used him a lot of times in games where they were losing. And it wasn't because Will Omen was a bad pitcher. It was that Will Omen was there for two reasons. He was there for one, to eat innings in games that they were going to use their really high leverage inning guys not for. You don't want to use Will Omen was a good reliever, but he wasn't an amazing reliever. You wanted to use your high leverage guys like Carlos Marmol back in the day. You didn't want him throwing in a 5-inning loss. But second, designated losers are pitchers that you trust that will give you a few innings and not open the doors more. You keep it just close enough to where your offense can get back into the game. And I think Aaron Savale and Colin Ray would be really trustworthy designated losers in a playoff game where you get down 4, the pitcher just doesn't have it. And it's the third inning, you're down 4-0. Guy's just not having it. You throw out Savale, you throw Colin Ray, and you say, listen, I need 4 innings. I need 4 innings right now. You got to give me 4 innings. You can give up 1 run. They're the kinds of guys who could probably go out there and do that. 3 innings, 4 innings of 1-run baseball. It keeps the game close. You get 2 runs, you get 3 runs. All of a sudden, that's a close game, and you're back in it. You didn't have to use Brad Keller in those situations. You didn't have to use Daniel Palencia in those situations. You didn't have to use somebody like Andrew Kittredge in those situations. Use Aaron Savale. It keeps your bullpen for tomorrow. It saves your innings. So I think that those are important roles that we don't talk about enough probably on teams because we think of the saves, we think of the holds, we think of the important moments. But when we talk about these comebacks where teams, they mount that comeback, a lot of those things are the stories we don't talk about. In my background, I got a big Philadelphia Eagles helmet, and I watched the Eagles-Rams game over the weekend. And the Eagles, it was an amazing game. And everybody's talking about the blocked field goals. Everybody's going to talk about the offense exploding. What people probably aren't going to talk a lot about is that prior to those blocked field goals, the Rams kicker had 4 field goals, and that was because even though the Eagles gave up yards, when it came down to it, their defense stopped and they held on some pretty close times where the Rams could have put it in a touchdown. And it's those little kind of moments that allows the come. Yeah, it's those moments that allow the comeback to happen. So the highlight of Jordan Davis running all the way down the field, score the touchdown will live in Eagle lore. But what won't are those like 3rd and 3 stops on the 36-yard line that, a pass breakup, those plays right there. That's the reason that they were able to come back, because they didn't have a touchdown, and that would have stretched the lead too much. So if Aaron Savale and Colin Ray can do that, even just one time, if you can steal one game in the playoffs like that, just because you have a guy like that, I think they're really important. So they play a role, just not in the leverage role. They play the role in that game 3 where maybe you can hold them close enough to come back. Or even if it's not, you can come back. Maybe you just score enough runs that the other team has to use their leverage relievers today and they're tired tomorrow. It's these like little games within a game that I think those players have a role and they have an importance. Probably not going to be the guys that we talk about. They're not going to win any MVPs. We're not going to really talk about those things, but they can play important roles. So I'm glad we have them. Those are guys that will be important.
Northside Baseball Podcast. I want to stick on the topic of pitchers and another specific name, Shota Imanaga, and he's been a little shaky at the beginning of starts lately. It popped up kind of sporadically throughout the year, but more consistently in his last few starts, Jason. He's allowed at least 1 run in the first inning, 4 of his last 5 starts, and in 3 of those, it's been at least 2 runs in the first inning for the opposition. There was another one where there was 3. Imanaga leads the league in home runs allowed since the All-Star break. Looking at his splits too, when I was trying to decipher and figure out where the trends were, this dude gets better as the game goes along. Like you look at his splits the first time around seeing a lineup compared to the second time and the third time, he quite literally gets better and better and better as the game goes along. But I just keep thinking, and I trust Shota, I do, but I keep thinking in a playoff game, when like from the first pitch, it feels like it's nail biting time, right? Especially in a condensed best of 3 series, if this is your game 1 starter, when I'm thinking right from the get go, it's already like buckle up time. And if you give 1 or 2 up right out of the chute, it can be deadly in a condensed best of 3 series that the Cubs are kind of staring. They will be in a best of 3 series. We just don't know who yet, although it looks like it'll be the Padres. I do trust Shota in a big spot in a big moment. He feels like someone who's built for that moment. We just kind of have to see it. But the early numbers and first innings of games, especially his last 5 starts, it's a little bit concerning to me, maybe a bit puzzling as to how he sort of goes about solving that riddle.
Yeah, it has been a little bit weird. And when I was, just pulling up his data, I kind of played around with it from the standpoint of going back to the White Sox game. And that was that White Sox game over the summer. He got absolutely blasted in. He had he had missed some time prior to that. And it just, looking at his numbers, there's a bunch of really interesting things in the data, just looking at it, that kind of stand out to me. One is that his K percentage is up over that time period. So he's striking out more hitters. He's walking less. His walk percentage is down 1.5%. His BABIP against is still only 233. His left on base percentage is 79%. That's about where you would expect it to be. His xFIP is really good at 3.92. Like that's kind of what you expect Shota Imanaga to be. That's a top type of a pitcher. That's a guy that you throw in the playoffs. But his FIP itself and his ERA is much higher. So and that all comes back to that home run rate. He's giving up too many home runs. And it may be that he's throwing too many strikes. And I kind of noticed that earlier with his heat map of where his fastballs have been on the season. And obviously you're not going to be able to see this as you're listening to a podcast, but he has gotten this year, his fastball has hit the middle of the zone just a little bit more kind of spread out, right? Last year was real condensed, kind of in a very specific place, and his fastball really plays up. His fastball, with as much ride as he gets, you do not want to throw this pitch on the bottom third. And the reason why is because if you throw it in the bottom third of the zone and it has ride and it takes off a little bit on you, it rides right into the heart. So you go from a pitch right into the heart, where when you consolidate that pitch on the top third, you either hit the upper third, which means it rides over bats, it rides over that swing plane that hitters have, which creates bad contact, weak fly balls, or it just goes out of the zone. It's a ball. There are worse things in the planet than throwing a ball. Now it's bad when you throw too many balls and you can't get ahead, you can't get your count leverage, you can't use your other pitches. This is something that Ben Brown, I think, has struggled with a little bit, and caused him to kind of just like pump strikes at times, kind of inconsiderate of where they're going. Shota just seems to be he's missing a little down this year, and more pitches are riding into the zone. And I think if those things could get a little bit better, and he could find that a little bit better, that would be good. And we can see that in the expected WOBA against him as well. It's much higher, and especially over the last little bit for him. So I think it's fastball placement for him. Whatever happens as the game goes, he seems to figure it out, right? Fastball placement gets really good. He had a bunch of strikeouts in his last game. But again, he started it off with runs early. And I think if you can just kind of fix that first inning, maybe fastball placement, then we've got something there. That's at least my kind of look and read into the numbers and the data.
2 questions. First one for you. Any chance Cade Horton is your game 1 starter?
Yeah, actually, I think I just saw it today that I think it's kind of almost lining up that way.
Oh,
The way that,
really? Okay.
yeah, it's kind of lined up a little bit that way where like Cade Horton is either going to be pitching like Saturday or Sunday to make sure that you have home field advantage, or he's the guy, right?
Okay.
He's the guy who starts game one. I think from a Cubs perspective, looking, and we'll talk about the Padres here in a minute, but the Padres are much worse against left-handed pitching, much
I
worse.
was just looking
So,
into that this morning.
so I guess if you start with Cade Horton in game one, you do one of two things, right? Either you are saying, I am going to save my lefties for games 2 and 3 if I need them, or you could start with the lefties right off the bat and then save Cade for the next one. But then maybe Cade Horton doesn't pitch for 7 days, 8 days, 9 days. Who knows? Especially if you don't pitch him at the end of the season. So I think right now it's probably lining up where Cade Horton goes game one, which is crazy. I don't think that any of us thought that Cade Horton was going to be the game one. And I'm still not quite certain he's our best starting pitcher. Sometimes those things just line up in a weird way. But it also allows you then to maybe not pitch Cade Horton against a higher seed if you can win games 1 and game 2, right? It's at home, so you don't have to throw him on the road. He doesn't go into like kind of a hostile environment. He's got the crowd behind him. So you throw him game 1. If you win game 1 and game 2, then it's Matthew Boyd going into the next series, and you don't have to start a rookie on the road in game 1 against the 1 or
Milwaukee,
2 seed.
probably. Yeah.
Milwaukee, yeah, against Milwaukee.
Yeah. Second
What do you
question
think?
for you. Yeah, no, I just he's been the best pitcher for the Cubs for the last how many weeks, months. And it's just I think if he was in his second year or his third year and he was posting these numbers, you'd be like, well, duh, Cade Horton is of course the game one starter. I think the one caveat that people have stick in their mind is he is a rookie pitcher, but he has been their most consistent, their best pitcher for quite a long stretch now that I'd be completely fine with it. My second question for you, Jason, is take the Padres out of it. Just view this from it's a neutral team standpoint. Any chance Jamison Taillon is your number 3 starter over Boyd in the postseason? And the only reason I ask that, I should say, I don't want to like rip Jamison Taillon, but it's not so much me endorsing him as much as it is Matthew Boyd's really been struggling. Like he has really, really been struggling. Last outing against the Pirates only went 3 innings, 7 hits, 4 runs. 1, 2, 3, and 4 of his last 5 starts, he's allowed at least 4 runs. And you start to wonder if the wear and tear of all these innings is catching up to him. If it were me, I still think if it's just neutral, if we're not factoring in you're playing against the Padres because you mentioned the splits, I think I'd still go Boyd. I think even though he's been pretty brutal for a little bit of a stretch here, if he can just dial it in a little bit for what we saw for such a big chunk of the season, I feel like I trust Boyd to go out there. Even if you tell him like, just give us 4 or 5 innings, I trust Boyd more than I do Taillon.
Yeah, I probably would as well. Taillon is a fine pitcher. He's pitched kind of well lately. I know Matthew Boyd hasn't pitched so well. I'm not so worried about the wear and the tear. Velocity seems just fine. I do wonder if it's like he's just a little off on a pitch. He's just not getting on top of a pitch. He's just a little bit off on sequencing and things like that. A lot of the data doesn't really suggest that there is somebody who's like way out. His arm angle is basically where it's at. He's releasing where it's at. If these were like a wear and tear things, I think we would see like velocity drop. We'd see his arm angle drop. We'd see laziness coming out of that. And I'm not seeing any of that when I look into StatCast data, when I look into his Fangraphs page. He is getting hit, but I do think it's more like a pitch sequencing issue. One of his pitches just isn't rolling so well right now. But I think he got a little lucky as well in the first half of the season. And we probably didn't talk about that enough. His xFIP was higher than his ERA, and he's kind of had some backwards results lately on that. So I still like Matthew Boyd a little bit more than I like Jamison Taillon, all things neutral. That's probably where I would go. Of course, not everything is neutral. If we go up against the Padres, I just Matthew Boyd all day long because they hit righties way better than they hit lefties. If it's the opposite way where you're looking at a team and you've got a lefty killer lineup, I think the Mets are if I remember off the top of my head, the Mets may be a team that really hit lefties well. Then maybe you do go Taillon in those moments. But I try to stick with a longer term view than kind of a recency bias, which is really easy to do when you go into the playoffs. Is believe that like the way that we are playing recently is the end all be all, and that's what we have to look at it as. But it almost is the opposite way of what you should be looking at it, because when players are playing not to their norm recently, it's almost more likely that they're about to snap out of it than they are going to continue down this path, right? So yeah, I still would probably go Boyd, but I think once you take neutrality out of it, you could probably make an argument that there is a team that you want Tyon to face more so.
Yeah. Next week when we are talking, we will have the playoff matchup set in stone for the Cubs. As of right now, it's not set in stone. We do know Brewers win the Central. Cubs will be a wild card team. They'll be that 4 or the 5. It looks like the 4. It looks like it'll be against the Padres. So I thought, why not just foreshadow a little bit? Maybe by posing the question too, like, hey, are the Cubs and Padres on a collision course? Because it sure looks like that, Jason. San Diego's 2.5 back of the Dodgers in the NL West. Padres have 5 games left, 2 against Milwaukee, 3 against Arizona. Dodgers have 3 against Arizona, 3 against Seattle. Cubs and Padres, I don't like when you talk about them being on a collision course, Jason, for the wild card round. You want to draw from the pool of games that they played against one another this year, but I can't really do that. Like the Cubs and Padres each won 3 times against one another this year, but the reason I don't want to go back and do deep dives into any of those 2 series is because they all came back in the first half of April. Like the Cubs and the Padres played 6 times by April 16th, and that was the last time they played. And so I feel like if it was more recent,
Different teams.
maybe, exactly. Mid-April, you're still trying to feel out like who you are. Mid-April, the Cubs were still dealing with the shock of Justin Steele's gone for the year. The Cubs were still wondering, what exactly do we have in PCA? And they might still be wondering that now after, the cool off in the second half. But you're still trying to navigate in the middle of April because you're bracing yourself for a long 162 game journey. And so I would just say I get it if people want to go back and create some content, articles, videos about like here's these 6 matchups between the Cubs and the Padres this year.
Mason Miller wasn't even.
I know. I can't.
Mason Miller was in the AL West.
Yeah.
Like it's just
I can't do it
now.
I can't do it. The one thing I will note is I was reading stuff about the Padres today, and they are lined up in a way where Pivetta should be their game 1 starter, and then game 2 would line up for Michael King, but he's returning from injury, so could they go Cease? Could they go Yu Darvish? Like maybe. But things are lining up for them where Pivetta would be the game 1 starter. So I look more at like, here's what the potential matchups could be, not here's what happened when they played each other 6 times back in April, because I think you're in the same boat. It's hard to really pull anything from those matchups.
Yeah, you really can't. They're forever away ago. Like they don't matter anymore. I know that's weird because it's still the same season, but it might as well not have been.
Yeah.
It really well might as well not have been the same season. So I don't want to read too much into it. I also don't want to read too much into 6 games anyways. 6 games are 6 games, and what is going to happen in a week is going to be the reality is somewhat random. If you just look at data recently from Major League Baseball in the playoffs since they've expanded, it's basically a coin flip. It doesn't matter if you're the home team or the away team, coin flip. 50% chance of winning. That doesn't mean every series is a coin flip. It just means that basically it doesn't matter if you're the high seed or the low seed. You kind of go into this and you don't really know what's going to occur. You can look at the worst teams in baseball beat the best teams in baseball all the time. The Pirates swept the Dodgers a few weeks ago, and y'all, that's 1 3-game series. This is what it is. It's a 3-game series. You play all the games at one place, just like you would in a 3-game series. So I wouldn't read too much into it if they played 6 times in August, but I definitely don't want to read too much into it. They played 6 times in April. Andrew Kittredge was in Baltimore. Willie Castro was in Minnesota. Mason Miller was in Oakland. These players will play roles in this series, and they weren't there. Matt Shaw wasn't Matt Shaw.
Yeah. Do you want to hear a real funny one?
It was in Iowa. Yeah.
So I was just going back and looking to kind of hammer home the point that both you and I are making. So the Cubs had won the first 2 games of a series against the Padres in April, and they were going for the sweep, Jason, on April 6th. Padres won that game 8-7. Ben Brown was the starter for the Cubs. Julian Merriweather came in relief, and Ryan Presley got the loss.
God,
So this is why you can't. Ben Brown started. Merriweather came in relief. Ryan Presley got the loss. That's why I can't look at these matchups for three pitchers who aren't going to have an impact. Aren't Ben Brown the only one remaining? You know what I mean?
Yeah. He's the only one left in the organization. Yeah, it's we're just in a place right now where I'm not all that interested about what happened in April. I really am not. When you look at the Padres, they are a good team. But they're also a team that that I think is beatable, and you can find their weaknesses pretty easily. Since the All-Star break, they're the 5th worst team in terms of F4 when it comes to starting pitching. They also have the best ERA with the bullpen. That makes sense. They traded for Mason Miller. You add Mason Miller to an already good bullpen, you get a great bullpen. But the Cubs have had one of the best starting pitching ERAs since the All-Star break as well, which lets you it makes you feel like those first 6 innings, that's where the Cubs game is, right? You win if you can win the first 5 or 6 innings, you can beat the Padres. That's a very winnable game. And the way that the Padres are, they're beatable there. You look at Dylan Cease. Dylan Cease has some good underlying numbers, but his total season line is not particularly great. He hasn't been as good as he's been in the past.
Not going deep into games either.
No, he's not going deep into games. His strikeout numbers are really good, but he's giving up more home runs. He's giving up less ground balls. These are his left on base percentage, which is a lot of times a bad luck statistic. It's really low this year, but his xFIP is good, but it's not nearly as good as it was last year. Dylan Cease is not unhittable. Once you get past Dylan Cease, Michael King is coming back from injury. He hasn't thrown a ton. What he looks like is kind of, up in the air. Nick Pivetta is a fine starting pitcher, but, I think if you said, Nick Pivetta versus Shota Imanaga, that's kind of a toss up. I feel like I know Pivetta's numbers are going to look better than Imanaga this year. Part of that's because Imanaga's been hurt. Part of that's this weird Shota first inning thing that he's got going on. But I think generally speaking, I don't think that they're too far away from each other in terms of what each starting pitcher is really capable of doing. So you look at the Padres. I don't think that they're unbeatable. Their offense is super top heavy. I mean, it's just very top heavy. When you look at that team, they have what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hitters that are going to be in that lineup most nights with WRC plus of 114 or better. And then they have guys like Luis Arraez, who's a 97. They have Ryan O'Hearn, who's been picking up 97. They've got a bunch of these other guys who just aren't very good that they kind of mix and match within their lineup. Ramon Laureano has been really good. He's very good against lefties, and they need somebody like that. But as a team, they have a 94 WRC plus against lefties. It negates somebody like Gavin Sheets, who is a pretty good hitter. He's one of those guys who, when I talked about those guys who hit pretty well, Gavin Sheets has a 114 WRC plus. He has he's in 525 plate appearances on the season. But then the second you go into his splits, you start to see he has a 93 WRC plus against lefties. So you take out a guy who's a really good hitter, and all of a sudden he's a bad hitter. And he's right at that kind of team level of WRC plus. So the Cubs have, I think there's a path there. I said it, I think the last one, that the Padres were my favorite matchup. They remain my favorite matchup right now, which is no shame or no shade to the Padres. They're a good team. They're going to make the playoffs. We're all good teams at this point, but I do think that there's a lot of matchups that I feel comfortable with. And I don't know if there was a matchup that you were looking at that you kind of targeted it on. For me, it was the starting pitching and the lefties.
Yeah, that is the one that stands out the most. I remember last week when we talked about this, I said I would actually prefer to play the Mets instead of the Padres, but your logic for wanting to play the Padres obviously makes complete sense. We mentioned the Mets fighting for their playoff life, and Cubs are going to start up a series with them. We're recording as usual on a Tuesday for a Wednesday published Northside Baseball podcast. I thought we'd finish up, Jason. We've kind of gone around the horn the last couple of weeks, these playoff races that have tightened up, and I think it's really, really awesome that in a 162-game season, we are down to the final week, and there are still numerous races that are completely up for grabs. We mentioned the NL West feels like the Dodgers, right? Dodgers lead by 2.5 games, but it's not over yet.
No,
that last that last NL wildcard spot is incredible. The Reds and Mets entering play on Tuesday are tied, and the Diamondbacks are just one out, but they finish, the D-backs do, with the Padres and then the Dodgers. So it's not exactly going to be a cakewalk for Arizona to try to leapfrog Cincinnati and the Mets and knock down San Diego and then the Dodgers. The Reds, meanwhile, have the Pirates and the Brewers. And you have to ask yourself at that point this weekend, is Milwaukee going to have the 1 seed locked up? They're 3 up on the Phillies for that. They might not have, much at all to play for. The Mets have the Cubs and the Marlins. So let's just start with that. We can just kind of rapid fire these. But NL wild card spot, do you have a favorite that you see taking it? Because if I'm going just off how these teams are playing right now and who they have on the slate, it's honestly hard for me to not go Cincinnati. They have the Pirates and then the Brewers this weekend, who will probably have the 1 seed locked up by then and won't be playing for anything. D-backs have the Padres and Dodgers. Mets have the Cubs and the Marlins. So, and the Marlins have been playing good baseball
they're still not
weeks.
they're still not
they're not even
statistically eliminated.
Yeah.
No,
so
they're
I
still
don't.
in it.
If I'm just going off paper and eye test with what I saw the Reds do to the Cubs this past weekend, who they have on the schedule this week, the fact that they aren't a game behind, they're tied with the Mets for the last spot, I'd probably lean Cincinnati, and I might just eat crow next week if I'm wrong and be fine with it.
On terms of recency things, yeah, you got to go with the Reds. In terms of like teams, the Mets are just a better team.
Yeah, I know.
They're the better team. They have Juan Soto, which the Reds could only dream of having somebody like that. They've got Francisco Lindor.
Alonso. It goes on and on.
They've got Alonso. They've got a bunch of these young pitchers that they brought up. I feel like roster wise, it's the Mets, but yeah, I mean, it kind of works hand in hand. Like, if the Reds make the playoffs, it's probably because the Cubs won some games here. The Cubs need to win a couple games just to make sure that they lock up home field advantage. So, like, my heart also says, like, I kind of hope it's the Reds. I live just south of Cincinnati, and I have a lot of friends who are Reds fans. So it make them happy. So, my heart says I kind of hope the Reds win. I will also say this, though, as somebody who lives just south of Cincinnati, Reds fans are intolerable anytime they're mediocre. They can be intolerable. So while a lot of Cubs fans, I know they're tired of Brewers fans because they live up in the area, it's a lot closer. Man, Reds fans become absolutely delusional the second that their team wins 80 games. So so there's a little bit of me that's like, I love my friends, but also like Reds fans in general are kind of crazy. So we'll see how that goes. It's going to be fascinating when it's happening. I don't know about you, but my favorite playoff race is what's happening in the AL Central.
Let's go to that because I was gonna
banana town. That I can't get over that. The Tigers have 1-9. The Guardians are 9-1 in their last 10. This was locked up. The Tigers had the best record in baseball for most of the season, and then like over the last 2 weeks, the Tigers have basically said, you know what? Maybe we don't even make the playoffs. Maybe we'll just stay home. And it's absolutely crazy because the Tigers are down to a place in terms of just like the regular playoff percentage. And I'm just pulling it up because I had it up. The Tigers playoff percentage is down to 85%. There's a 15% chance that a team who literally like 2 weeks ago had the best record
at a 99% chance, literally
has blown it, and that's my favorite. I lose my mind. We're down to the last week, and this is a team that they've been running away with the best record in baseball in the AL for months, and now like they really might not win the division. There's a chance they don't make the playoffs, and that is shocking to me. You talk about like a full year coming down to it. They're one game above Cleveland, and their path to get there couldn't be any different. They couldn't be any different. Cleveland's selling in July. They traded Shane Bieber away for a rookie that was not going to pitch.
One player.
And now one player, and now they're right here. It's crazy. They've had with the relievers that they've had who've been thrown out of baseball essentially for cheating. Their best reliever is gone. He's probably never pitched in Major League Baseball again. They traded Shane Bieber a long time, and look at where they're at. They're one game away. That blows my mind.
Yeah, the American League is going to be a fist fight for multiple reasons, more ways than one because of these races going on the last week. But you are right. Cleveland's a game out, right? And on top of that,
Yes.
Jason, they start a 3-game series against each other tonight, and it's Gavin Williams against Scooble. I think the most captivating stat I can find is a pretty simplistic one, Jason. On September 2nd, the Cleveland Guardians were 68-69 on September 2nd. They were a game below 500, 68-69. They are now entering play tonight 84-72. They have gone, my math is not great, but they have gone 16-3 in its last 19 games, and they're a game behind the Tigers entering play tonight, and that 3-game set is in Cleveland. That'll be fun to watch. Elsewhere in the American League, the Blue Jays have a tiebreaker over the Yankees, lead them by 2 games, but it sounds like a lot, but the Blue Jays have started to stumble. They have to play the Red Sox to start on Tuesday night while the Yankees get the White Sox. So that'll be, if Boston can take 2 out of 3 from Toronto, which isn't out of the realm of possibilities, and the Yankees take 2 out of 3 or sweep the White Sox, the AL Central becomes close. Seattle just swept Houston over the weekend. They lead by 3 games. Feel pretty. The Mariners have had some gut-wrenching collapses at the end of seasons in recent history. You feel good about them winning the AL West. And then the AL wild card, we'll finish with this, Jason. Nobody has clinched yet. The Yankees are very close. Guardians and Astros right now, entering play Tuesday, are tied for the last spot, and Boston leads them by just 1 game for the second spot. And so one of these other, Detroit-Cleveland takes the cake, because you're talking about playing for the division, 1 game behind, 3-game set starts tonight, and you have Scooble, the reigning Cy Young winner, against Gavin Williams to kick it off. But if you're circling another series, Boston and Toronto, that starts on Tuesday, is going to tell a lot about who wins the AL East and who ends up with some of these wild card spots, because the AL wild card race is increasingly fascinating as well, because it looks like the Yankees at minimum will be a wild card team, and then those last 2 spots are completely up for grabs between Boston, right now Cleveland, and then Houston. But that could easily become Boston, Houston, and Detroit. And then, like you said, Detroit could end up on the outside looking in. So the American League, I think, is where the fascinating games are going to be taking place. You have the NL wildcard race, but the Phillies have won the East, the Brewers have won the Central, the Dodgers probably going to win the West. There isn't a division clinched yet in the American League. So should be pretty fascinating this week. Any final thoughts on that?
No, I just can't wait. I mean, like, we kind of talked about this a little bit ago, that we didn't think, like, last week was like, oh man, it's like crazy. Like, there's no intrigue. And then last week happened and we got all the intrigue, man. I'm excited about it with the Cubs feeling like they probably have the 4th spot. And a lot of these races just felt like they were kind of wrapped up for a while. It's fun that we've kind of gotten down to a point where there's still some craziness to happen. One of my favorite kind of non-Cubs playoff-ish moments was, I think it was Dan Johnson who hit that home run for Tampa Bay. It was like 2015 or something like that. Last day, tie break, hit a home run. I was out with my friends and I remember seeing that, and that was crazy. And I love moments like that with the lack of the like tiebreaker game nowadays. This feels like as good as it gets with Major League Baseball in like the playoff intrigue. So I'm really excited about it. I predicted the Red Sox were going to go to the World Series from the AL on Northside Baseball to start the season. Seeing that their playoff time is still alive makes me feel like my chance of getting that one right still exists. They probably aren't going to go to the World Series right now. I think there's a couple better teams in the AL, but they're
I will
pretty
say
darn
this in
good
your
team.
favor, though. If Boston gets into the postseason and it lines up, not
They're
much better
pitching-
you can do in a game 1 than Garrett Crochet. Like, it's hard to top that. It's hard to top that.
If you want to go Madison Bumgarner style, like, Crochet is the way to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the way to do it. So
Empty
I'm just
the
excited. I'm just excited. I'm going to enjoy the week for what it is, and then really have to start diving into Cubs Padres next week, because that's I can't wait for playoff baseball. Cannot wait for Cubs playoff baseball. It's been too long.
Cubs start a 3-game set with the Mets tonight. By the time you listen to it, the game will have concluded. It's Peterson against Horton, nationally televised game on TBS between the Mets, who are playing for a whole hell of a lot, and the Cubs, who have locked in a wild card spot. He is Jason Ross. I'm Mitch Widmar. This is the Northside Baseball Podcast. Next week, when we are talking, we'll have a matchup set in stone for the Chicago Cubbies. We'll see you then.